Today we're going to be talking about techniques for doubles and drag figures. We're going to be talking about these approaches with diddles, drags, and what I refer to as diggits. The goal here is that we can understand how to approach musical passage that require doubles in a variety of circumstances. Before we go on with this lesson, it's understood that everybody watching the video understands double strokes and how they can be manipulated from slow to fast and fast to slow, going from wrist to wrist and fingers to arm and vice versa. So first, let's talk about the terminology. Diddles. Diddles going to imply that there are two notes in one hand in the same rhythm as the surrounding notes. So if you look in the second section of the Percussive Art Society Standard 40 PAS rudiments, you'll see that these are the diddle rudiments. First is paradiddle, double paradiddle, triple paradiddle, and then your paradiddle diddle. Next are drags. This is the second point. Drags are going to apply two notes in one hand followed by a single note on the other hand. Usually the double notes before the single note are grace notes or played at a softer dynamic than the primary note. We're going to see this in some rudimental applications and often in concert or orchestral situations. Last is the term diggits, and this is simply an example of onomatopoeia in that the word itself, digit, sounds like what we'd use for fast double passages that are going to require larger muscle groups that we'll get to later in the video. So, let's first start with diddles. As we talked about, diddles are two notes on one hand that are in the same rhythm of the surrounding notes. So an easy example is the paradiddle. We kind of have three techniques to discuss with this. The first is when we're playing slow. You can see that the only thing needed here at this slow tempo is to use our wrist to initiate. No fingers needed, just wrist initiation. As we begin to get to a faster speed, I begin to employ a technique that I like to refer to as a wrist break. So there are 2 points here. From a teaching standpoint, I approach it this way. First thing I want to do is have the performer grab the stick and put the bead of the stick on the batter head. The second point is you're going to allow your wrist to break and fall down. So while maintaining your fulcrum, let your wrist break, and you'll see that your back fingers will open up while still maintaining the fulcrum in the front of your hand. So the two things that are going to control your diddle interpretation are the space of your fingers from your palm. So the more open it is, this space, the more open the space between the first and second note of the double. The closer that it is, tighter if you will, the spaces between your palm and your fingers, that means there's going to be a shorter space between the first and second note of the diddle. The second thing that's going to control your diddle interp is your fulcrum pressure. So if it's tighter, typically the first and second notes will be closer together of the double. If it's more relaxed, then obviously it's going to be vice versa, that it's going to be more open. So we're going to work on an exercise to work on this transition, wrist break, so you can learn this concept of going from a downstroke to a wrist break position, incorporating the fingers. Next are drag figures. Now these kind of employ a lot of different things. They're going to mean that there are two subordinate notes or two softer or grace notes that are going to be directly followed by a primary or a more dominant or louder note. The interpretation of these drags are going to be controlled, as we just talked about, with spacing of your fingers as well as your fulcrum control. And I'm going to go over an exercise that's going to work with you on this transition of techniques that you may need for doubles. So this exercise is going to start out with wrist techniques. It's going to go into a wrist and finger incorporation, and then it's going to go into the last portion where you're going to need primarily just arm and work on this sound of the diggits. that we're talking about. Two pieces that I find that are often performed that employ all of these concepts that we've talked today. The first is the downfall of Paris, the opening where we have these drag figures. And the second are measures 15 and 16 in the 9th etude of Delécluse's 12 etudes. They both employed these variety of techniques, and we'll demonstrate now. The first is the first phrase of downfall of Paris. As you can see here, besides the roll figures that begin the piece, that the first measure starts with this wrist break concept, going from downstroke to the wrist break and using fingers for those doubles, as well as transitioning into doubles in the arm. The next is measures 15 and 16 of Delécluse's 9th etude. When we have this piece for an audition or a job interview, wherever we want to play it, I find that these two measures are ones that always need focus. And the concept here is to understand the techniques involved to be able to successfully play this passage. So with measure 15, these drag figures come rather quickly, and if you played a double stroke roll at that tempo that you're playing those drags, you would find that you would need arm. And that goes to the third point that I've been talking about with Diggits. Diggit, Diggit. And with this process, with these Diggits, if you will, is that I'm actually initiating the stroke from my elbow. It's a full forearm stroke. You'll find that some teachers, their students have been using this term like chicken wing as far as this goes. But for me, I'm thinking from the elbow, and then I'm removing the wrist as part of the stroke. That it's simply fulcrum pressure, spacing of the fingers, and then your arm motion to get these fast diddles in. So on measure 15, on the last 3 eighth notes, 4 and 5 and 6 in, with the drag figures, I'm going to need to use a little bit of arm to get these drags to happen. In measure 16, it's basically the same thing. We've just offset the drag and opened it up to now that we have like a flam tap passage. So here I'm going to be using a little more wrist in the stroke. I'm going to be relaxing my fulcrum pressure and opening up the space between my palm and fingers to allow these doubles to open up to that 32nd note rhythm where we see 4 and a 5 and a 6 and a. Lastly, going back to the Diggits exercise that's already been introduced, I think it's important for any snare drummer to be able to use these larger muscle groups to play faster passages. I also use this concept with arm and multiple bounce rolls. I found that I'm more consistent and that I can actually play softer with my larger muscle groups. And so working on this concept of initiating with the arm or your elbow, kind of removing the wrist turn for this at these faster tempo markings, and controlling the interpretation of the diddle with your fulcrum and finger spacing. I appreciate you watching. I'm hoping that some of these videos are helping some of you as players, as well as teachers as a supplement. This is the third of the series. You can find the other 2 videos linked here. And as well, if you would like to see more, please comment below and subscribe on the side of your screen.